the feeling like I'm trapped in my damn mind. Tell the feeling like I'm rapping a damn lie. Tell the feeling like my life is a damn game.
Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller film named Malum. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a shot of the police officer, Will, who rescued 3 young women a few days ago from the clutches of a vicious cult known as Malum. This group specialized in abducting young women for sacrificial purposes, dismembering their victims and feeding them to pigs. Will's heroic actions were met with applause from his colleagues, but he couldn't bring himself to feel happy. He was filled with regret, wishing he could have acted sooner to save a 4th victim girl. His peers tried to console him, reminding him that he did his best, but the incident continued to haunt him. One ordinary afternoon, Will shockingly shot and killed 2 of his co-workers before taking his own life, leaving behind a message of apology to his wife and daughter. A year went by, and Will's daughter, Jessica, followed in her father's footsteps, becoming a police officer herself. On her first day on the job, Jessica was assigned to a soon-to-be-closed precinct for its last night of operation. Not long after arriving at the old precinct, Jessica overheard an angry man's voice, followed by a police officer who stormed past her, kicking a basketball in frustration. Trying to make conversation, Jessica mentioned that she had seen a chaotic scene with many officers arresting people as she drove in. Someone had even thrown a sheep's head at her car. The officer angrily cursed, explaining that those people were cult members before the 2 completed their shift handover. Jessica had actually volunteered for the night shift, wanting to spend a night in the place her father had worked before his death. She found her father's locker, only to discover it locked. As she tugged on it, she suddenly heard the sound of a bouncing ball in the hallway. Investigating the noise, she found the basketball lying on the floor with no one around. Just as Jessica was about to pick it up, she spotted a figure in the distance. She quickly turned on the light, but the shadowy figure vanished into thin air. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Jessica went to the station entrance to check and saw a homeless man leaning against the door, mumbling that he couldn't find his daughter. Just as Jessica was about to ask for more details, the man began to relieve himself on the glass door. Jessica watched him leave and reluctantly fetched the cleaning supplies to clean up the mess. In the utility closet, she found a pair of pliers and decided to use them to pry open her father's locker. However, the lock proved to be unusually sturdy. Jessica picked up a fire extinguisher and started smashing the lock, but was interrupted by the sound of a ringing phone. As soon as she picked up, she heard pig squeals and a muffled woman's voice mixed in. The caller's words made no sense, and soon they started mimicking pig sounds as well. Jessica thought it was a prank and hung up, returning to unlocking her father's locker. She shot the lock, breaking it open. Inside, she found a bundle of newspapers and a photo of her and her father. Jessica carefully placed the photo in her pocket and noticed a corner sticking up in the locker. She lifted it and discovered a box containing case files and shocking crime scene photos related to the Malum cult. As she looked through the files, the eerie pig squeals started again. Jessica went to her office to check the surveillance footage and saw a greasy pig tied up outside the station. She called headquarters to request assistance, but they said there was a major disturbance involving the cult that night and they were short-staffed. Jessica was told to stay indoors and not to worry about the pig outside. Ignoring the instructions, Jessica went out to check on the pig. It had cult symbols painted on its body and a necklace with the name Betty around its neck. Betty was one of the victims in the cult case. Jessica locked the pig in an empty room, kindly leaving it some water. Just as she was about to lock the door, she heard a noise behind her. Investigating with a flashlight, she found someone had opened the back door, and a dark figure darted by. The person was rummaging through the evidence box from earlier. Jessica approached with her gun drawn, only to discover it was the homeless man looking for his daughter. He was holding a pair of shoes from the evidence box. It turned out the homeless man was Betty's father. Jessica saw that the man was out of control, so she used a stun gun to subdue him. She handcuffed him and escorted him to the holding cell. The man seemed terrified of the room and refused to enter. Jessica, left with no choice, dragged him in. Unexpectedly, the iron cell door closed on its own. Frustrated, Jessica tried to contact headquarters through the intercom, but there was no response. The homeless man behind her started to go crazy. He suddenly charged at Jessica, knocking the flashlight out of her hand. Jessica crouched down, searching for it. The next moment, a beam of light hit her eyes. She scolded the homeless man and ordered him to hand over the flashlight, or she would shoot. To her surprise, the light beam moved, revealing that it was not the homeless man holding the flashlight. There was a third presence in the room. Jessica felt a chill down her spine. She banged on the door, screaming for help like a chicken. Then she heard her father's voice, followed by the flashlight rolling towards her. Jessica picked it up, turned it on, and scanned the room. Suddenly, 3 corpses fell from above. Thankfully, the door behind her opened, and Jessica hurried out, locking the door behind her. As she did so, she recited the police oath to embolden herself. She returned to her office and tried to call headquarters again, but this time, no one answered at all. Jessica recalled that during the shift change earlier, the male officer had left his contact information. She used her phone to call him for help, but strangely, she was met with a barrage of insults. The officer told her to handle things herself. Jessica, feeling wronged, hung up the phone and began to clean up the mess the homeless man had made. That's when she noticed a USB drive hidden under the files. Jessica went back to her police car to retrieve her computer and happened to come across a call girl who had been left by the side of the road. She had some minor injuries, and kind-hearted Jessica brought her back to the station to treat her wounds. The call girl, seeing Jessica working alone, couldn't help but marvel at her courage, saying that the police station wasn't just ordinarily scary. It turned out that years ago, when the cult members had been detained, the call girl had been held in the cell next to them. Those murderers had bragged about how they had tortured their female victims. But before dawn, all the cult members had strangled themselves to death with pillowcases. With this in mind, the corpses that had briefly appeared in the holding cell probably belonged to the cult members. The call girl suddenly stared at something in front of her. Jessica followed her gaze but saw nothing. She asked the call girl what was wrong, but she suddenly started screaming like a chicken and saying some crazy things. Jessica wanted to call for emergency assistance, but the call girl instantly returned to normal. She quickly sent the call girl away to call her clients. But then, the strange, harassing phone calls started again, still coming from the woman making pig sounds. However, this time she claimed to have kidnapped several girls, and there were screams of women in the background. Jessica immediately reported this to headquarters and learned that 3 girls had been abducted that night, and surprisingly, they were the survivors Officer Will had saved years ago. Headquarters said they would trace the call and asked Jessica to wait patiently. She took advantage of the break to check the USB drive. The footage showed Betty being captured and viciously beaten by several women, who left her face battered and unrecognizable. Jessica couldn't bear to watch any longer and closed the video. Her phone rang at the perfect moment. It was her mother, who had become an alcoholic, babbling on and trying to persuade Jessica to quit the police force. As they were talking, the video on the computer started playing again. Jessica tried to close the video, but no matter what she did, it wouldn't stop. The people in the video even looked at Jessica and called her name. Then Jessica's own image appeared in the video. She saw herself get up, walk around the desk, and throw a box on the floor. Jessica looked behind the computer, and sure enough, there was a box on the ground. She picked it up and examined its contents, finding a human-shaped target used for shooting practice. Jessica thought this might be some kind of hint. She mustered her courage and headed to the shooting practice room, only to find her father's report attached to the target. The moving target stand on one side inexplicably started, sending one target after another towards Jessica. One of them even had a bright red Malum symbol drawn on it. Jessica tore it off, but saw a face covered by a pillowcase beneath it. She screamed and fled the practice room, running all the way to the front door of the police station, only to find it locked. Mysterious ghostly shadows appeared on the glass door. Jessica ran to the back door, but discovered it was also sealed shut. She completely lost her mind and hurried back to her office to call for help from headquarters. They calmed Jessica down and told her to wait for backup. Jessica took out a photo of her father, but instead found some powder on the back, revealing a cult symbol. Suddenly, the police station's broadcast system started playing an eerie woman singing, and the elevator bell rang chaotically along with it. Jessica aimed her gun at the elevator entrance, but was caught off guard when a basketball came flying from behind. The computer on the desk suddenly started playing a video, a recording of Will interrogating John Malum, the leader of the cult, and even on the brink of death, he remained calm, saying he would return to take revenge on Will's family. He also claimed to have a demon supporting him. In the video, Will suddenly stood up and stared straight ahead. Jessica found it strange and repeatedly reviewed the footage, only to discover a demon lurking outside the interrogation room window. Just as she was focusing intently, someone covered Jessica's head with a plastic bag and pushed her into a room. Jessica found herself unable to move, lying inside a body bag. A medical examiner bustled around her, surrounded by the bodies of cult members, each with a marked pillowcase covering their heads. They struggled and whispered, and Jessica couldn't help but cry out for help. A group of cult followers barged in, beat the medical examiner to death with clubs, and dragged away the bodies of their fellow members. Jessica's body regained its mobility, but she was confronted by a bloody corpse. She suddenly woke up on the floor, wondering if it had all been a hallucination. Then she heard voices in the distance. Jessica then grabbed her gun and went to investigate. 2 police officers approached. They were once Will's colleagues and had come to support Jessica. She wanted to ask one of them about what had happened years ago. He said that after Will captured the cult members, he began acting strangely, repeatedly watching the interrogation video. Even after the cult leader's death, Will warned the officer not to enter the interrogation room, claiming that John was still there. The officer seemed to recall something and took Jessica to see the gun that Will had used to kill people. Just as he was about to put the gun away, Jessica saw the officer's face become a bloody mess, followed by another hallucination. She saw John holding an infant, performing a baptism for the child, and calling it Jessica. Soon after, Jessica snapped back to reality. She heard the homeless man's cries for help coming from the detention cell. As she ran over to check the situation, she found the other officer pointing a gun at the homeless man while muttering something. Jessica immediately opened the door to free the homeless man. She returned to her office and tried to call her mother to ask about the baptism, but couldn't get through. The computer screen came to life again, showing Jessica's mother nursing a baby. It turned out Jessica's mother was also a member of the cult. Meanwhile, the homeless man heard his daughter Betty's voice calling out to him. He opened a door and saved a pig. Unaware of this, Jessica was engrossed in watching the video when Betty, her face disfigured, charged towards her, dragging a broken leg. Terrified, Jessica scrambled to her feet and tried to escape. She hid behind a door, pulling out her gun. Outside, Betty's screams continued. Leaning against the wall, Jessica anxiously waited for the right moment. Soon, Betty appeared to flex her ugly figure, and Jessica fired a shot in reflex, causing the pig to fall to the ground instead. It turned out that it was the pig chasing her, not the deceased Betty. Jessica stood up as the doorbell rang incessantly. It's her mother who had seen the missed call and rushed over. Jessica asked her mother if the events in the video were true. Her mother confessed that she used to be a member of the Malum. She had just broken up with Officer Will when she became pregnant, and John took her and her daughter in. However, after giving birth to Jessica, she started experiencing terrifying hallucinations. Determined to escape with her child, she left with Will, and the family lived a peaceful life away from the cult. But a year ago, John reappeared, showing no signs of aging, and tried to bring Jessica's mother back to the cult. So Will stopped him and arrested John and his accomplices. Just as her mother finished speaking, a figure darted by. She immediately chased after it into the office, with Jessica following behind, perplexed. However, she heard cries for help from behind her and had no choice but to leave her mother to investigate. She then saw a cult member holding a young girl who told Jessica that John wanted her and that she was the most important part of the ritual. As soon as the cultist finished speaking, she killed the girl. Jessica didn't hesitate to shoot the cultist, only to see a large number of cult members emerge from the darkness. She quickly locked the door and went to look for her mother in the office, but she had disappeared. The phone at the headquarters rang, asking about her mother's situation. Jessica had never mentioned her mother's visit to the headquarters, so she realized that the person on the other end of the phone was not a cop, but the cult leader John Malum. Jessica cursed and hung up the phone. At that moment, the homeless man approached. His body, gnawed by the pig, was in tatters. He charged at Jessica like a madman, and she had no choice but to shoot him dead, donating him a free home in hell. Then she went out looking for an exit, only to encounter another victim halfway, with 2 policemen as the culprits. They had already been controlled by John. Before Jessica could react, she heard a young girl's cry for help. She immediately killed the cultist who was hurting the girl, but the girl had already lost too much blood and was dying. Will's voice followed, saying she was unworthy of being a police officer. Jessica knew this was just an illusion created by John. There was an attack outside the door, and she pursued it. Jessica arrived at the detention cell and saw a girl hanging in midair. She desperately wanted to save her, but the rope around the girl's neck tightened, causing her neck to burst. Thick blood splattered all over Jessica. She muttered the police oath, fired a blank into the darkness of the roof, and retrieved her father's gun. Jessica followed the singing and found the cult members who had taken their own lives earlier, now turned into demons. They led her forward, where she saw a man sitting in a chair. She removed the hood from his head and discovered it was the cult leader, John. Jessica retreated a few steps but was blocked by the cult members. They parted, and a demon called Baron appeared. The Malum cult worshipped the low god, and Baron was the messenger of these evil deities. The mask on his face drifted towards Jessica, causing her to lose her sanity. She fired her gun repeatedly in the corridor, killing the hideous demons before her. When she came back to her senses, she realized she had shot her mother. Jessica completely broke down. The demons whispered in her ear, and she picked up the gun to take her own life. The surrounding cult members applauded and dragged Jessica onto another throne. It turned out that she and John were both chosen by the low god and had to sacrifice themselves through death. Now that Jessica had ended her own life, the Malum cult's ritual had come to a successful conclusion. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.